and employability. Although we recognize that university level education in prison is much more than being about a job, it's much more than being about recidivism rates. Those are all important realities, of course, but education behind bars transforms you as a human being. It transforms your sense of what you are capable of, what your role as a citizen in society is. And I could go on and on about this. It's tremendously important. And that's why education, not incarceration, is so important to the work that we do at INN. So founding various prison to college pipeline initiatives here. And I encourage all of you who want to know more about those to please reach out to us. We can share more, or in our discussion, we can share more about the Ubuntu Learning Community, Accounting for Change, and all of the other visions that we have in terms of expanding access to higher education in prisons. One of the reasons why this is so important is because leaders come from these programs. We have seen INN around the world that so many leaders, including those present, partook, who then come out of prison and go on to create strong programs that work to reform the system, that use their experience of the system to make change. So many of them come out of university programs in prisons globally. So it's important that we invest in them, because in investing in them, we are investing in leaders, which means we're investing in structural change. Our other program that supports formerly incarcerated leaders is the program MT mentioned, that he is the project coordinator for, and that's the Global Freedom Fellowship, where we bring formerly incarcerated leaders from around the world. Our new cohort of 14 leaders from 12 countries arrives on Friday. This will be our third cohort. So we are building more than a fellowship. We're building a community of individuals who have been in prison in their respective countries and are now back in the community, doing incredible work in the space of education in prisons, of legal empowerment, of reintegration, of all of the necessary work that is really required in order to correct this system and to build a justice system and build better community safety along the lines of what we would want to see in the world. So I wanted to throw back a question to my colleagues, and that is, if you could explain a bit about what are the challenges of studying, of education while in prison. And MT, although you didn't pursue higher education in prison, you were very critical to the development of educational programs in Drakenstein, and we're working on that when I met you all those years ago. So you know from firsthand experience in terms of access to education and also building education programs in prison as well. So I wanted to ask all three of you if you could paint a picture of what it's like to study in prison, what some of those, in South Africa in particular, and upon release, if that was part of your experience as well, and what do we need to know about that? So I'll pass it to you first, Kofi.
Thanks, Pez. Yeah, studying behind bars is arguably the hardest thing that I've ever had to do in my entire life. It's actually easier to join a gang and just get along and go on with it than actually, pursuing studies, let alone high level of education. As you mentioned earlier on, UNISA was the only higher learning institution in South Africa that was offering degree courses in prison. So we had the same challenges. There's this myth in South Africa amongst a lot of people, and I still hear it today, that education for incarcerated individuals is free. That's a lie. We had to struggle the same way as everybody else to find the resources, find funding. If we're privileged enough to get a scholarship or a bursary from a Good Samaritan, that would be great. Little things, for example, like access, especially now in the digital age, access to laptops, access to data, access to devices, so as to be able to do your schoolwork, write your exams, do your assignments, and so forth, is almost impossible. The officials in the correctional centers, there are a few, yes, that are able to assist, but the majority are very hesitant and reluctant to go out of their way or go the extra mile so as to allow you to be able to continue with your studies. It's difficult. The support from your fellow, I remember, I vividly remember in my first year of academic or pursuing my studies whilst incarcerated, a lot of my colleagues, in the cell where I was in, didn't really understand, that an individual will be able to study whilst incarcerated. Simple things like, wanting to asking to keep the light on a little bit longer because there's a certain time where you are not able to, have the lights on, and you would find a few of us in the toilet or in the bathroom, under candlelight, trying to do our assignments and so forth. So it's a challenge. It wasn't easy, but a few of us persevered, and yeah, it sort of like it changed our lives. It changed our mindsets, and it made us better people, if I could put it that way. I think I'll hand over to my former roommate, Nimpiwe, to be able to elaborate a little bit further on the struggles that we had as a collective.
Yeah, thank you, Kofi. As you have mentioned, that there is a myth that people that are studying inside, it's government funded, and on my journey, I had to apply for bursaries, and lucky for me that there was an organization that was willing to fund my education, which at some point they ran out of cash of funding, and then I had to stay another 2 semesters without studying, looking for another funding. And then Kofi with the ULC, they came through with another bursary. That's when I was able to finish my studies. Also, Kofi mentioned that sometimes inside prison we have a problem of overcrowding. So you'll be in a room that's supposed to hold 25 people, but the number is close to 50. And you must understand that you can't say to 50 people, please be quiet now, I want to study. So it's impossible for you. That's why we find ourselves in the toilets, doing your assignment in the toilet when people are fast asleep, and then you go into a toilet and continue with your studies. Also, I studied in prison when it was COVID as well. And then the universities changed to online teaching. That was a hassle and a tool because of the security measures that have to be put in place for me to access the laptop and able to write. Other exams were in the late evening, where I'm supposed to go and write exam at 7. That's UNISA. So it needed the prison to reshuffle their security measures, and it was difficult because some of the officials were reluctant to do that. One thing about studying in prison that is also make life difficult, it's the attitude that you receive from your fellow incarcerated individuals and the officials as well, because sometimes you'll find that the officials are saying that you are wasting your time. Why are you persuading the qualification while you know that you have a criminal record? You are not getting to be employed anywhere. Why waste your time? So you work through all that negativity, but in the end, we were able to finish our qualifications, and here we are doing great things using the same qualifications that we acquired, because we knew what we wanted to achieve by persuading education. I'll pass it to you, Tizere.
Thank you, Ndera. Thank you, Kofi, as well. I think that you have laid the foundation very well as far as education is concerned and the challenges that are being experienced whilst in prison. I was in the juvenile side. So in the juvenile side, what they will usually do, they will give a lot of programs, to the youth, because when we are in the juvenile side. But, with my group, we started to realize when we were reading the white paper in prison that education was supposed to be something that is a must for the juveniles who are not adults. Instead of sending juveniles to go and work on the chicken farms or on the farms, the juveniles were supposed to be sent to go and study, And then we started to have some conversations, serious conversations with the head of prison that they need to be starting to prioritize education for the youth. Now, what happens is this, because we were on the side of the farms, the guys that were with us, they were guys who were working in the farms, of which education was not an opportunity that was given to them, even at a younger age. So of which now when you put in education and you put work in front of them, most of them, they will choose work because that's what they know best, not education. But after we pursued that, eventually correctional service, they barged in and they decided to say that, okay, listen, you're gonna go to school. But when they opened up the school, I was arrested. I was at grade 10, so I was at standard 8 when I was arrested. But when I went back to school, I had to write an assessment report. But with this assessment, it says that I was doing sub A. They needed to teach me how to write. So the assessment were all wrong, because I didn't have somebody at home that I can ask. I can send them to my old school to get my report. So that is also another one of the challenges as well. If you don't have a family that can support you, that means that you can study all of your life in prison without even getting the right qualification because you don't have the proper support, of which are programs like ULC, that is where they are coming from. They are coming in to close the gap of support, for people to get a better education. And I've watched guys, the prison that I was in, the juvenile side, Kofi will testify in there. We were always at number 1, with matric results, we were always at number 1. So we were doing under college, what is it called, Rosebank College, but it was a college studies. But one thing that we've continuously realized when we were studying, guys will study, and then in the middle of their studies, they get parole and they go outside, And then after 2 years, you see the guys, they are back again. You see, this guy was really good on finance. He was really good on mathematics. He was really good in whatever that he was studying. But the problem, they always end back where they have started their education. And you start to ask yourself, why? And we started to realize that the challenge was not so much on the education. The opportunity of education, it was good as a first step. But now the challenges that needed to be addressed was the challenges of people being excluded to participate economically. I had stories of guys being chased out of work because of they find that they've got a criminal record. And those who have declared that they do have a criminal record, they never get an opportunity to sit, on the interview, of which it was really, really hard. So we at INN, what we've done last year, we did an event at Waterfront trying to address this issue, of which we call it Ban the Box. We were more aggressive about it, saying that, what, let us not ask people about their criminal records, let us give people opportunities so that we can, that's the only way we can be smart on justice. And then because of that aggressiveness, we receive a lot of attention in the media. I was once called by correctional service because at that time I was under parole. And they asked me, how did I speak on TV and in the radio and talk about joblessness? Then I asked them, what must I talk about? Because we're not employed. We are out, we are rehabilitated, we've got all the opportunities. And then the second event that we are campaigning for, it's a fair chance hiring, of which the fair chance hiring, it's a pledge of which trying to get companies to sign and say that, we're going to give you an opportunity, irrespective if somebody's got a criminal record, to sit down in front of the interview and be interviewed. After all, you're looking for the skill, but you're not looking for the people's past. So these are the events we're trying to bring in front so that we can address this issue. We understand that I can get a job, Ndira can get a job, Kofi can get a job. We're just a handful out of how many people that really, really needs these opportunities who don't want to get into prison. One thing that a society that fails to understand is that they think that somebody who's in prison, they do not want to change. I see that with guys that are deemed as serious transgressors. And I've seen from heart to heart how much they regret of how they've done and how much they can take an opportunity. And some of these guys, you find that, they didn't just went to prison one time. They went to prison for minor crimes, and then became violent because there were no opportunities that are presented before them. And presenting opportunities, we are preventing a lot of crimes. And that way, we can be able to educate a lot of people, as we are doing at this present moment in this session. About the people that are coming out of prison. We are still human beings after all. So the challenges of being educated in prison, it does not only end in prison, but it also continues outside, that you have to learn that you're going to be rejected by community. Even they say that you are rehabilitated, you are educated, you've done everything that needed to be done. So with that being said, I'll pass the mic back to you, Bez.
Thank you, MT. That's really, really enlightening to hear. And Indira and Kofi, thank you for sharing just some of the many, many challenges. I have to say that from my perspective, one of the challenges of doing this work in South Africa in particular, although not uniquely in South Africa, in countries where there is a high crime rate and people are very bitter, and rightly so, understandably so. They're frustrated with government. They're frustrated with the state of crime. They're frustrated at the fact that there isn't access to higher education for people in the communities, or enough access to higher education for people in the communities. So I find one of the great challenges of doing the work in this context is there's a particular backlash that all of us face. And they say, why should you, person in prison, get education, higher education, when the person in the community, Tulani in the community, can't get it or has challenges accessing it? And so there tends to be, a kind of backlash that is intense as we build these programs and as we partake in them as a community. And what I always say to that is, actually, it's important to recognize, first of all, it's not an either-or equation. We believe in access to higher education for all, and we certainly think there should be more avenues built for people across the board to higher education access. But we have to recognize that people in prison represent a unique population with a possibility for leadership development that benefits us all. The work that Kofi is doing with education in prisons, the work MT is doing with INN globally, the work Indira is doing in terms of building innovative community safety initiatives that actually create community safety and don't just further the cycle of harm. These are vital things that benefit all of us. And so when we, as we say at INN, when we invest in people and not prisons, the entire community benefits. South Africa benefits from that. The world benefits from that. And so therefore, yes, it is worth investing in a special way in individuals who are incarcerated and wanting to pursue higher education. To answer the question in the chat about access, UNISA has been the only show in town in South Africa really ever. So we are excited to be bringing new institutions to the table, and there's room for plenty more. If there's any audience members who are at any other institutions and want to get involved, come talk to us. We are eager to collaborate further. And there is also a question in the chat about, and I think we can move towards questions now as folks put them in the chat or raise their hands. There was a question about how many people are studying. I think Kofi and Dira, you may have the answer to that, but we can certainly say there's been a reduction in recent years. Kofi, do you want to explain why?
Yeah, Baz, I actually have those stats at hand. In the academic year of 2024, in the Western Cape region, we had only 26 incarcerated students that were studying further studies with the University of South Africa. That's 26. In the Western Cape alone, we have more than 32 prisons, on average having more than 1,500 incarcerated, sentenced individuals, but only 26 students. The reason for that mainly, as Baz mentioned, is that in the year 2014, I think it was, the University of South Africa and the Department of Corrections entered into an MOU that centralized learning behind bars. This gave birth to what we call the UNISA hubs, each province only being allowed a maximum of one UNISA hub. The UNISA hub in the Western Cape being all the way out in Worcester at the Brandfleur Correctional Center. And this is how we're all able to meet, because we all came from different centers, different parts of the Western Cape, and now we're forced to choose between whether we want to still be close to our families and loved ones, already being away from, society, moved all the way to Brandfleur, where we had to further our studies. This led to a lot of students dropping out. Initially, UNISA being an institution of distance learning, specializing in that. I mean, you have UNISA students in countries such as Indonesia, Australia, all over the world. But in South Africa, in the correctional systems, the centralization of this led to a lot of students dropping out, and it decreased drastically the numbers to only 26. I believe that even this year, that after the registration period, which was in February, I think it's maybe dropped a little bit lower to 25. But it's unacceptable. It's appalling, and the fact that our government is allowing this just is mind-boggling for me. Dimpiwe, anything to add?
Thank you, Kofi. I remember when they started with this UNISA hub, I was also persuading my first qualification, and I was in Hildestrom Correctional Center in Caledon. At the center, at that time, I was the only one that was studying in the maximum side. And then when we moved to Worcester, we were close to 60. We were close to 60 students in the whole Western Cape that came through. After that number, it was never reached again because of being centralized, as Kofi was saying. I know there's a large population, or the large number of students in KZN area, because also they do have some school that is doing great in terms of matric results among the correctional centers. But also I've heard that most of the guys that are doing great, they got these distinctions when they're doing their matric. They never go and persuade higher education. Yeah. Thank you.
I see we have some. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say we have questions. Yeah.
Okay, let's just allow Kelly and Derek. Derek, I think you had your hand up first, and you might want to just introduce yourself with a little bit of background about your own experience of studying behind bars. Derek, you're on mute. You're still on mute.
Sorry for that. I was saying, listening to Ndira, Kofi, and Teteleli took me back many years, because I was sentenced on the 5th of February 1986 to 7 years imprisonment for sabotage as a political prisoner. But that sentence took me not only to Robben Island, but also to Helderstrom, to Brandvlei, and actually all 5 maximum security prisons in the Western Cape. And the time I was incarcerated at those prisons, we still, the criminal prisons or the common law prisons, as they call it, we still slept on the floor. And we had to fight for our studies to get, for example, a chair at the Helderstrom or desk into our cells to be able to study. And we were treated, of course, as political prisoners very badly by the warders, because especially the colored and African warders wanted to show the white warders how bad they treat us. And even the prisoners, the common law prisoners, would be used against us to show the warders how bad they can treat us, because we were always very limited in numbers at these criminal prisons, so that they can get, the criminal prisoners or common law prisoners, better privileges from the warders. So studies was very difficult for us as political prisoners. And as a result, many of us who could not contain themselves when they face these problems from fellow prisoners instigated by the warders, or by problems created by the warders for them, this privilege of studies, because studies in prison in terms of the prison regulations is a privilege, it would just be taken away from you. Sometimes the warders would come just before the exams into your cell, search your cell and find a loose photo that's not in the album and say, but the prison regulations say a photo must be in a photo album, so therefore you have transgressed and your studies are taken away from you. And then you can't write that final year end exam and have to repeat it the next year. So a lot of us got discouraged and many of us did not complete our studies. I was lucky to complete my studies in prison, at least my high school studies, and started with my degree studies. And again, I always say this thanks to the anti-apartheid movement and the Solidarity internationally, who raised funds for us. And these funds were through our lawyers put on our property, as they call it in prison, and we could use these funds myself to study through John Kennan Collins and complete later my 2 degrees in law. Now I'm a public prosecutor, and working as a public prosecutor in this year, just in one case on a Friday, I got convicted 4 young men who at the end of the day received, all 4 of them, not older than 23 years, life imprisonment without the option of a fine. And I argued against the life sentence because I'm well aware of the fact that apartheid was a crime against humanity. And now, when our young people who find themselves in this situation is being brought before court, they appear as individuals, and everybody forget about that crime that injustice of the crime of apartheid, which breeds this criminality that we find in our communities today. Now, it is a very difficult task. And I found myself time and again when I argue for sentence to say there's opportunities in prison. I studied in prison. I completed my high school studies. I started my degree studies to try and encourage these young persons who are going into our jails. And I know what's happening in those jails. I know about the gangsterism. I know about the overcrowdedness. I know about prison warders even raping prisoners in prison. How difficult the situation are for young persons in our prisons. Now, while I was at Helderstrom, I started a program, the grassroots program, with the social workers and the leaders of the gangs to try and teach the youngsters to not become members of the gangs, but rather study. I worked in the library. I became a school principal there, teaching them to read and write. And later we progressed in my negotiations with the head of the prison to have them to do their education through the Department of Education and Training. Then it was still under apartheid, and they could progress up to writing for Standard 4, as it was known that time. Because I realized in prison how important it was, because I mixed with the criminal prisoners when I was not on Robben Island, that many of these people, they find themselves in prison just because of the situation in which they grow up. Fathers and mothers abusing them, and community members abusing them, and the abuse in our communities being there because of the abuse of the oppressor, people living for generations with oppression and abuse, and that becoming culture in our communities, eating each other because they are being eaten all the time. At work where they are, where they try to make a living to survive. So I realized that if we can educate people, and indeed many of them that I spent time with, they changed their lives. I had recently contact with one of those common law prisoners that I met at the Alderstroom, who after he came out in search for me, he phoned Canon Collins' office in London to try and locate me. And Solomon Arons has changed his life in that interaction that we had. So education can make a big change in person's lives. But I just want to say this, that program that I started, which ended when I left prison, was to try and see how can one bring, stop the working in silos, bring the community outside, connect the community outside, the police, the courts, and the correctional service in a circle so that they can work together. And I was thinking every time, I'm thinking every time when I'm prosecuting persons, I'm thinking, you know, if one could just have a provision in the Criminal Procedure Act whereby when it comes to sentencing, the law makes it prescribe it, that the magistrate or the judge must ask the attorney for the accused or the accused, do you want to address me on the issue of your education in prison? I must sentence you now. Do you want to address me on that? So that education from the sentence already is made part of the sentence of every prisoner. Because then you create that link of there must now be a follow-through on this. This person was sentenced and he said, you want to study, this is his education before he is being sentenced. And so please make sure when this person arrives at your center that you make these opportunities available to him and so on. But there's a provision in the law that make it prescribed in the sentence stage that the magistrate must inquire about, from the person to be sentenced, what do you want to tell me about the opportunity to study while you are in prison? So that we can make this an official thing that people must be given this opportunity. I think that is the most important part that I wanted to raise. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. Thank you so much. And yeah, what a critical question, that question of silos and how we stop working in silos. Kelly, and you also would like to add something.
Thanks so much, and thanks everyone for sharing your work. It's ridiculously cool what everyone is doing. I wanted to find out, because this has kind of been an irritating thing for me in South Africa, well, in the South African context for a lot of different differently situated people, but adult basic education, adult basic literacy is a right for everyone. While it's immediately realizable for children, it should be progressively realizable for adults. And it isn't. And adult basic literacy centers don't really exist anywhere. And when we're talking about education in prisons, I wonder if there is any research anywhere in terms of basic literacy, one being a need for it, two, I guess, being a provision for it or a policy position on it, and see whether it actually comes into effect in real life, if that's a thing. And if there are some synergies that anybody would like to create in advocating for something akin to basic education, I would be very keen to have a conversation about that. Adult basic education in prison contexts, I mean. That's me.
Kelly, do you want to just say a little bit more about why you'd be interested in that? Or
Oh, okay. Sorry. Hi, I'm Kelly, and I'm an attorney, focusing on access to and maintaining access to socioeconomic rights in South Africa. I run a small private firm in Johannesburg doing this, but I'm also a former educator, a primary school teacher before I got into law, and that was focusing on learners with special educational needs at that point. But I do think that it's a really unsexy area of law for which there is very little funding, is talking about prison reform, recidivism, and so on. And I kind of like to work in really unsexy law. I don't know, Jill, what else must I say? I'm odd.
No, that's fantastic, Kelly, because, just to note, it's so useful for connections going forward, because I know that there are other people in this call who come from an ABIT background, and it's just really useful to know. I didn't know that you were a primary school teacher in a previous life. That's fascinating.
Sorry, I'm also a Canon Collins alumni.
Thank you. And I mean, I think that's what I was hoping we'd get out of this call. And I'm going to encourage people not to be shy again. Any questions you have, because I think for us as Canon Collins scholars and alumni committed to education as a vehicle for transformation, what are the areas of research? And maybe we can, if there's no other questions from the audience, we can throw this back to INN. Where is it that research is needed? Where do we need to, Kelly's highlighted, but Derek has highlighted the siloing of different parts of the system. Where is it that we need leverage to understand issues so that we can loosen them and build this as a research area?
I'll jump in and say that I don't actually feel the need is research. The need is political will. We know what needs to be done. We know what the situation is. Our community of people who have lived this, and Derek, thank you for your insights as well. Those are invaluable. We know what needs to be done. We already know. We need the political will to do it, and we need the funding support to keep doing what we're already doing. And that means to the question about the women, by the way, and Indira, thank you for answering that. There is a tiny percentage of women studying because there's no access. They have some computers. We were recently in the women's prison in Worcester. There are some computers in there. They're about a decade old and covered in dust. The only way that you can study is if you get a laptop and the bursary money. So there really has to be a will to invest in access to all levels of education. Our focus as an organization, obviously we support all levels of organization, including, basic education, literacy, etc. Our focus is on higher education because we're especially invested in structural change and the leadership that produces it. And so we really advocate for that. But I think the reality is that there has to be a situation where both philanthropies and government put the money where their mouth is and actually support this very desperately needed work, the bursaries for people studying currently, the bursaries for people coming home. Kofi was mentioning the Global Freedom Scholars Network. So what we've built a network of formerly incarcerated university students and graduates from around the world. We have chapters in 15 countries. Kofi is proudly wearing the emblem, the logo of the Global Freedom Scholars Network. I dropped the website in the chat if you want to learn more about it. But we are working really hard to support not just students studying at the university level on the inside, but also completing their degrees on the outside when they're facing inordinate challenges of reintegration, of stigma, of job discrimination and employment discrimination, because you are legally permitted to discriminate against formerly incarcerated people in hiring practices in ways that you are not when it comes to things like gender and race and sexual orientation. You can discriminate against someone if that person has a conviction. So we built the Global Freedom Scholars Network to really support students coming out of prison and say, come, we're building this global community of people who, if you were capable of studying under the conditions that Indira and Kofi described, then we need you in our community because you can make change and you can really advocate for the world that we are collectively trying to build. So I also saw in the chat that someone from Zim was commenting on programs in Zim. Part of the mission of the Global Freedom Scholars Network is to build more prison university partnerships around the world and develop out ones that are already in existence. So we'd be happy to hear from you and anyone else interested. I see there is a hand up. Sue?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask actually the Canon Collins people, I don't think I've ever interviewed a student who wanted scholarship funding for the RMTF funding, who's actually in prison. Have we ever had students applying for funding? Jill, do you know?
No, Sue, not to my knowledge. I mean, besides people, who were studying who were politically incarcerated for political activity, but we haven't. We haven't, and that's why we were so interested in this conversation, is because
I think we could discuss some of this further with Baz, actually, if that's okay.
Wonderful. That's exactly what I was absolutely hoping for, because it's reaching these audiences, reaching the most vulnerable who are invisible because they are so vulnerable. Yet the critical potential is so enormous. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Gillian, can I just come in? I wanted to speak about women behind bars who are studying. When we were moved from the centers, I was coming from Helderstrom. Mr. Grootboom, I was also in that Helderstrom maximum, where we had to convert a section of a clinic to start the basic education, the adult basic education, ABET, because the prisons, the buildings of prisons itself doesn't have rooms for schooling and everything. So we had to convert what we have there to turn it into a school, and then I was a facilitator there. In terms of women, when we got into Worcester prison, we find that there were 6 students that were studying through UNISA, but they didn't have access to the UNISA library. They didn't have access to laptops as we guys on the other side had, because there was a mobile bus that would come, so we could borrow books from it. We had to break the law, and I will take a book and I will smuggle it to the other side for someone to finish her assignment, and then she will again smuggle the book to me, and then I will take it back to UNISA. That's how difficult for women to study in prison, especially in Worcester prison where they are. Also, in terms of the education programs inside prisons. As Bez has said, we really need more partners, more university partners, to be able to continue with the work that we are doing. And I've seen a change in terms of the officials being able to welcome such programs. Maybe it's not because they like it, but it's because it gives prestige to their centers. They like such, but we appreciate that, especially if a member said, okay, look, Ndira, I've seen that you are doing this and that. Can you please come to our center as well? We appreciate that, but we can't do these programs without the funding and the partners, the university partners. Thank you.
I know we wanted to wrap up quite soon, but I just wanted to invite Dorothy if she wanted to talk a little bit about Malawi and the Malawian context, because we've got a couple of scholars who are looking at prison education in Malawi. Dorothy, I'm not sure, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you want to come in and say anything, we would welcome that.
Thank you, Gillian. I hope you can hear me.
We can.
Yeah, thank you. We are having a side effects of cyclone, so the network is unstable. I don't particularly focus on education in prisons. I'm more focusing on pre-trial detention. Yeah, but I'll just commenting on the subject that we are discussing. That in Malawi, in terms of, for most of the prisons, those who want to do their primary education, secondary education, I think that's what you say up to matric in South Africa, they can access that. But once they have done well at the secondary education level and they qualify to go to university, that's where they have the most challenge. Because most of our universities, they don't have a program like what you have in South Africa, UNISA, where you can do long distance. They don't. So basically, it's either they have to be released from prison in order to go and attend the university in person. And so far from what I know, that policy measure has not been undertaken. Yeah, so I think that's what I wanted to comment on. Thank you very much for giving me that opportunity.
If I can just jump in to say that the other on the continent, the other African chapters of the Global Freedom Scholars Network are in Kenya and Nigeria. In Nigeria, the Open University offers free education to incarcerated individuals, and they have several thousand who are studying against all odds, which means, you know, not even having pen and paper. So our partner organization in Nigeria, CELSER, is also running our Global Freedom Scholars work there. And they're a great part of their work centers on getting students the necessary, their needs in order to study through the Open University. In Kenya, we work with justice defenders, and they're an organization offering law, paralegal degrees and law degrees to incarcerated students. They work in Kenya, Uganda, and the Gambia. And beyond that, we are not actually, there are some programs available in Ghana, and one of our Global Freedom Fellows is from Ghana and is affiliated with an organization that does a bit of work in that space as well. So it is definitely happening in more places in Africa, I think, than people think. But it's happening sort of underground on a smaller scale and with an enormous amount of challenge and struggle.
I want to be respectful of people's time, but I'm also thinking if there's anyone else who wants to contribute, I don't want to cut it short. But you know, I was listening to your interview, Teteleli, with Aubrey Masango, and when you said that all prisoners are political prisoners. And I just really thought that was very thought-provoking in terms of, you know, drawing out that bigger context of how social ills manifest in different ways. So yeah, I think we should probably end it there, but I just want to say, although we're ending the session, I really hope the conversation can continue. I think there's some connections that have come out in the session and, you know, in different ways. And even if it's given us food for thought about how we perceive things, what our perceptions, what our assumptions are, then that's fantastic. That's really fantastic. Just open up our world, make it a little bit bigger so that we can begin to question what we do in our work, how we position ourselves, how we think about things, the questions we ask ourselves, which is really, you know, so important for us as scholars and leaders and activists. Yeah, I want to say thank you very much to INN and particularly Baz for reaching out and making the connection, but also to Indira and Mteteleli and Kofi for your generosity of thinking and contributing your experiences. And Tony Tendai has got a slide with just Tendai, I'm not looking at my slides at the moment, but if you can put it up just so that people can get emails and connections in case you want to. And then I'll send a few individual connections too, to various people. But Baz, Mteteleli, Indira, Kofi, any final words that you want to say? Thank you.
I will start. You know, if our prisons were a doctor, and every time 10 patients that goes inside the doctor, 8 of them, they end up being sick by the same virus or they get worse. We will revoke that doctor's license, you know, of healing people. And it will investigate why people are getting sick. And it's been something that has been happening for so many years that people that come out of prison, they ended up back in prison. And then we never ask ourselves why people who are in prison ended up back in prison. Yes, we know the answer, but it was never investigated and we never challenged the system, you know, and that is the greatest infringement against human rights, when you don't want people to participate and be economically free. So those are the challenges, you know, that we need to address as a society, because the will of the people is more powerful than the will of the government. And it is the will of the people that transforms societies, that makes the government to change the clock of time. So with that being said, I just want to say thank you to everyone being here with us. We do have 2 events that are coming up. For those who are in Cape Town, we will share the details with you, Gillian, if you can populate it. It's on the 18th. And for those who are in Johannesburg, they can join us for the farewell. So we have event in Cape Town on the 18th of March, and on the 25th of March, we have got a Johannesburg event at the Nelson Mandela Foundation. So we'll share all the details with Gillian, and then she can just populate for you, our friends. Thank you.
My final thought and my final saying in this webinar is, if South Africans, we always throw this, that one criminal act impact 10 people, but we don't reverse it and check it. One rehabilitated person who turn his back from crime, what is the impact on society? So that's where we need as a society to make sure that we give support to people that wants to change, so that they can impact the community, the society positively. Another thought-provoking question that I will throw to you, the people that have attended this webinar, is what kind of a person that you would like to be your neighbor when it comes out of incarceration? because we see that people, they always up in arms, especially when they see, when the news, there's a news of empowerment of people that are incarcerated. But forgetting that the same people that are in behind those four walls are coming back to our society. So it's very important, the reintegration aspect of people coming home from prison. And thank you for this opportunity to be in conversation with you, guys. Gillian, thank you for the invite, and the Canon Collins, much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Indira. I think my 1 minute closing would be firstly to Mr. Mtimkulu over there. We thank you and your comrades for the sacrifices that you made at the time, because it is because of you, Nelson Mandela's and all the other formerly incarcerated leaders, that we're able to receive this opportunity to also, follow in your footsteps and, strengthen our cause in getting an education in those incarcerated spaces. I want to leave you and Ms. Kelly, I think it's Kropman, from the legal fraternity. When you are in those spaces with this Legal Practice Council, please be our voices, be our advocates also in, persuading them and encouraging them to allow us also to, get over this fit and proper person test that they use in ascertaining whether you are going to be able to become a legal practitioner or not, because a lot of our comrades studied law, are back in society and aren't able to qualify as attorneys, lawyers, advocates because of this final hurdle that they have to take. So yeah, I'll leave that in your capable hands, and knowing very well that you'll be our voices in those spaces. Thank you very much, Gillian, for this wonderful opportunity.
Sorry, Kofi. Contact me about that. Let's have a further discussion.
Definitely. Will do.
Send you a joint email. Thank you lastly to everybody for attending. I know that, when people commit their time, it's a real show of support. So even if you weren't able to contribute directly, thank you for being here and for your support and for being interested in this. And we look forward to continuing the threads wherever they are. Yeah. Go well, everyone. Have a good evening and ...